Boom shakalaka. Can you hear me?
Got you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Ready to roll. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we are live here on the Crystal Journey podcast. And after a long wait for Risa here, me trying to get everything set up, I'm a little new to Zoom. This is the first time I've done a setup like this. So, once again, Risa, really do appreciate you. Risa, ladies and gentlemen, is someone that I've been connecting with for a few years now. She's quite the wisdomatic truth bomber. She's interested in a lot of really fascinating things. She's a fellow artist, fellow singer, dancer, and she is a very interesting lass. I mean, you're caught up in a lot of things. You're into a lot of what I would call the esoteric mystery schools. You're into healing. I know that's your main focus at the moment. You've been focusing on esoteric psychology and astrology, which is a little different to your run of the mill astrology, which we're going to get into. And I'm just curious to find out what's been going on in your world because I know you recently moved to Queensland from the ACT, and I was thinking of doing the same thing. In fact, a lot of people I feel like have been thinking of going to Queensland to kind of get away from. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's been going down in Melbourne, but it's been crazy lockdown. And then before you know it, the same thing is going on in Queensland. It's like you guys are going through your own little intense lockdown, Orwellian governmental control. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have the lovely, amazing, intelligent scholar, wisdomatic truth bomb, Risa, in the house, and we're going to spend the next 40 to an hour talking to her about what she's been up to. Risa, how you doing?
Awesome. What a great intro. And yeah, certainly a wide scope of things to play with today. Yeah, the move to Queensland. I mean, uh, where I was in the ACT, actually, we weren't too badly affected. And yeah, with what's been going on in my life the last 2 years, I've been in my own kind of version of a lockdown, let's say, psychologically, metaphysically, going through a very intense purification, a very deep dark night of the soul, which, of course, more and more people are being initiated into within their various phases of wherever their unfolding is, the kind of the having to let go of the old ways. And of course, we're seeing that reflected in the world at large. This what is happening with this collective distortion is simply a mirror to, like, it's the magnified macrocosmic reflection of these places internally that we have failed to meet as individuals and us as a collective, because of course the collective is only made up of individuals. So
Absolutely. As above,
yeah,
so
we
below, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
and we have to, as much as there's a need to be contending with the superficial in whatever way we are called to, if you're being a sacred activist or standing up for rights, however we are drawn into participation in these times, it's very important that we are also able to find the center, the quiet center, the burning center underneath all of what is appearing out there, so that we can really, yeah, it's like finding our own source so that we can center ourselves in that which is somehow transcendental or much more true than the chaos that we see as the manifestation of our disconnection from that place. So, this is the work that I've been engaged in with my partner here as well. Uh, yeah, coming into what does it actually mean to be a human being in these times? What does it actually mean that we have incarnated here at these times? And what are we asked to do with regards to the disillusioning of our own identity, of our own identities, of our own belief systems, and yeah, to come into true knowledge of what we are, who we are, beyond preferences, beyond what has been conditioned in our thoughts and, yeah, karma.
Wow. That's a lot to unravel. So you're focused on a lot of things in developing people's sense of being, groundedness, their journey, their past, their mission. And I feel like these things are ever more necessary in the current times we're in. I feel like when you're going, I heard the most amazing, well, I came across this meme just recently talking about how when you're going through adversity, like a tree, you tend to dig into the roots of the ground to ground yourself. And this is when you go out and you connect with your friends and your family. And when you're going through times of joy and love, that's when you stretch your branches like a tree out into the sky, and you want to reach out and experience new things. But at the moment, I feel like a lot of people are kind of digging in, finding their sense of purpose, the groundedness, connecting to their own community. And I just got the impression that your work tends to fulfill both those areas, and allowing people to find themselves and also ground themselves. So how did you get involved in this kind of work? Because you haven't always been following this path, I would presume. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think like many of us, it starts with the inquiring mind. It starts with the sense, even though we cannot articulate it, that something is not right here. Something is not in alignment with the way things are being run. And of course, we sense that. We tend to sense that first through our external experience of reality. Something's not right in how I'm governing my relationships. I'm attracting this kind of experience consistently, or what is going on with this control in the government, or what is going on with our education systems and the way we treat our children and shoving them into daycare. It's like whatever is that piece of the question that invites us into a deeper inquiry. So it began for me with that very much still of the mind, inquiring into my own nature, and particularly seeing that I had a lot of trouble with particularly things like personal relationships were really a great source of suffering in my life. And so it was like, why? Why is this happening? And plenty of feedback from different people just suggested, yeah, it was like, don't bother inquiring. Everyone's just fucked up and you just kind of manage it. And I just always thought that this was bullshit. It was always obvious to me that if we learn certain pathways, that they can be unlearned. They can, in fact, be dissolved. And some people in the modern psychological field can understand this, but still it's very much, for the most part, about accepting that you're broken, but then not really getting to the core of that. It's just instead about management. It's like you figure out ways to kind of dance around yourself rather than simply getting to the core of what is truly going on. What is the origin in you that is creating this suffering, the disconnection? And of course, that movement is very hard for people to make because it takes us to the core of our own suffering, to shine the light of that which is underneath most of our movements, at least when we're still in that egocentric state of mind.
Well
And
said.
so,
Well said. I
yeah.
feel like you've really surmised the heart of what this entire thing is, the journey, trying to, I mean, first understanding that there is something that is amiss here. Hearing you talk about that, it kind of reminded me of the start of The Matrix, the classic movie with Keanu Reeves, because from what I remember, there seemed to be something that was a little off. And the deeper that he digs into it, he realizes that, oh, that there definitely is something off. And then finally he gets that choice. Do I go further, or do I just get caught up in this incessant day-to-day hustle and kind of just live a 9 to 5 life, And I guess the beautiful, courageous thing to do is to dig deep. I can feel like a lot of people want to walk away from the truth, want to walk away from self-discovery because they think it's easier. But one of the most powerful things I remember hearing in a lot of my youthful learnings was that the truth, regardless of how painful it is initially, is always better than uh, blind ignorance. Because at some point, not knowing and not having an awareness of yourself, it will manifest to affect you on some level if you're not ready for it. And this is kind of like a DeMartini idea, but if you kind of shrink away from the challenges in life, they will constantly reappear, and they will find you, and you'll still have that difficulty, and you won't be prepared for it. But if you go and face these incredibly brutal challenges, it's like the universe will work to help you to achieve those goals and deal with those challenges.
Mm-hmm. And that happens because if everything is one, the truth is one. And of course, we believe in separation because we're identified with like this as like the end of myself or something. We're identified with matter, right? So to come into the spiritual revelation is to become identified as that which doesn't change, which then transforms matter. It's like in a lucid dream. If you wake up in the dream, you realize it's not real. And that's what allows you to bend it. It's like then you can start to, and so life is like
Exactly.
that.
That's
So of
powerful.
course, anything, if you're running away from yourself, of course, the only thing that can happen is that the unconscious, which is literally everything else outside of what you believe yourself to be, from your place of identification, your belief in what you are. So if I'm running away from my sense of feeling unworthy, it's so painful and it's in the unconscious, I have a deep unworthiness wound, then I keep running into situations that bring that part of me to myself, where I attract people that reject me or somehow reflect to me my lack of self-worth. And that happens until our consciousness stops the tracks of the running away and to sit there and burn in the hell of feeling that. And then what we find when we sit with our pain, and this is what it means to bear the cross, to walk with your own cross, to crucify yourself. You walk with your suffering, and you meet your suffering, you stop running away from your suffering, it is in those moments of absolute hell and a sense of hopelessness, and I can no longer get away from my limitation, from my suffering, that this ends up turning into itself, and it burns a hole at the center. And at that center is revealed light. It is revealed you as the transpersonal nature. And it's no wonder that it often takes people a great deal of suffering before they wake up, because we're just trained to keep trying to rearrange the surface of our lives without seeing that we're creating this from the inside out. So when we turn towards ourselves and we bear our cross, and this is where the journey, and this is how it was for me, where it broke out of personal development, because of course, as I was saying before, it starts with an inquiring mind. Okay, what is this? Where did this pattern come from? Okay, I do some shadow work, I do some emotional work, I look at like the matrix programming, okay, like whatever those parts are, you know, removing yourself from certain circumstances, even physical health, changing your diet, like basically trying to evolve and take better care. But at a certain point, there is a crucifixion where the ego self, which is trying to make itself better, can no longer do that. And this is still the phase, the threshold that very, very few people are crossing. It's calling more and more and more, but it's still very hard at this point. More and more people are engaging in personal development, which is great. It's what we'd call the first initiation within some of the esoteric teachings. But the second initiation happens when the ego can no longer make itself better, because you see that ego, that personality, isn't your source. You are something far deeper than that. And that is where the turning in on the suffering happens, and where the crucifixion and the surrender, this is a surrendering to higher consciousness. I cannot do this on my own. Humility, bam. And this is where people start to have heart openings. And this is not the same as just gathering esoteric knowledge. It is an opening of the heart center as well. And beautifully in the Matrix, you know, you talk about Neo from the Matrix trilogy. I mean, that is a Christ mythos. That's exactly what happens. He goes through the questioning, and he gets removed from the Matrix, but he still doesn't know who he is, right? And he still cannot, dodge the bullets. He doesn't know who he is, which is to really know. And it's not a mental knowing, of course, because this is why when he jumps off the building, you know, everyone fails the first jump, you know, when he's doing the initiations. And he has that point, and he has to die, remember, because the agents shoot him, and he literally dies.
And he surrenders.
And then he wakes up.
Yeah.
I know myself as the Christ I am. Yeah.
That's so powerful to hear you talk about that moment, because I often make a lot of references, well, to the Matrix in general, but that specific moment where Neo becomes the one, because what I see in that is not only a surrender, but I kind of look at these two states of mind. There's this conscious you, which a lot of people think, even in art, a lot of people look at things, whether it's martial arts or creating music, from a very left brain sense, like I must be completely in control and figure out what I'm going to do in my mind. And then there's some people that basically detach from that left brain ego, and they surrender to what I call the muse. And it's this idea of letting go and allowing Christ consciousness, God, Buddha, Allah, whatever you want to call it, kind of manifest through you. This is the ancient idea of the genius. It's derived from this concept of the genii, where essentially you're allowing this muse to work through you. And what I see in the Matrix is Neo basically letting go. Like there's this point where he becomes unaware of how he's doing what he's doing. Like he's watching himself, you know, do martial arts, and it's almost as if he's watching himself from another part and allowing this other force work through him. And a lot of musicians refer to this as tapping into the muse. And I love the concept, because it's basically like reminiscent of what you're saying, this idea of letting go, surrendering to something else, your higher self. And once you open up your heart chakra, the anahata, like in mystery schools, this is associated to opening yourself up to the higher consciousness. That's when you allow that Christ energy to work through you. So what you were saying there, like that's really powerful for me. And that's something that I always try to do in my music and, in a sense, my life. And this idea of surrendering and not getting so caught up in the ego when you're trying to create.
Yeah, I mean, it's that call that we're all walking towards, and it is the call into meeting yourself. It is the call into knowing God. And when you say the Christ consciousness, what I've observed in the collective is more and more people are having what I would call, specifically in regards to the heart center, let's say, because there's the mind, and we can talk about the three centers in a moment, as well as the head, heart, and the gut, and what this kind of thing brings into peace. But specifically with the heart, people first tend to, they go through what I would call a water baptism, as far as I understand it from the texts. But, that seems to be what makes the most sense to me. And the water baptism is, it's like the sacred, loving, unified heart, which recognizes the soul. It's like, oh, I'm not my personality, I'm my soul. And this soul feels like a light body. And I see the soul that I am, and I see it in you, and I recognize the unity of all souls. And so this is like a first initial step of opening transpersonal love. However, there is a deeper layer of the heart that is also possible to open. And this is exactly what I was getting at with the suffering piece, because people can go through some dark nights of the soul and go into water baptism. But the baptism of fire is that which sets the being alive with that fire, quite literally. When people go through a fire baptism, it's intensely physically painful, as it was for me and what I've heard from others too. It sets the cells. It's like a burning. It's actually what I would suggest is an aspect of Kundalini. It's not it's not from the root though. It's like, spirit directly penetrates the system and
Let's
starts
get into
to
that. Because I was speaking to you early, and you mentioned that it's interesting because I recently connected with you after not speaking to you for some time, and it's like I was speaking to almost a different person. And you spoke a little about how you've obviously gone through this awakening of fire, and you went a little into how, well, this entire experience, and I'd love to hear about that. So what was your awakening like?
Yeah, well, I'd been through a water baptism, and as it happened, life didn't want me to hang out in there too long, because it kicked me up the ass not long after that. So I was about two months, I was alive in the baptism of water. And in the biblical texts, John the Baptist is like a big spiritual figure in the Christian texts. And John's said to be this wild man, and he takes Yeshua, Jesus, through his first series of initiations. But even John the Baptist himself said, basically paraphrasing, Jesus will take people to where I cannot. And what is meant by that is that the fire baptism is something even deeper than the water baptism. And it's not about like, you're not spiritual enough if you're not in the fire baptism, but it's just that phase. It's like, where does that threshold point happen? So the water baptism happened as first starting to inquire into, because I had done a lot of the mental stuff, and then it was started to open, to shift down here. So the question was, what is love? And I had manifested a lot of codependent, unhealthy relationships with men in my life. And so the question was like, okay, why am I seeking love? And where is the lack? Where is that sense of lack? And, going to the core rather than stopping, trying to grab it from outside. And so that was just journaling and investigating, and then just meditating on where I felt love in my life. And I worked with children a lot. And I had a very deep Christ love for all the children that I worked with. So I kind of just went into that feeling even deeper, and like, okay, so where do I feel that in my body? And what's another angle of that? Oh, gratitude. Or when someone really gives me something and I receive it, it's felt in this like chest area as this warm energy. And so it was just a going deeper into things that we had already experienced, of course, because most of us can have experience of that, but like going to it sort of at a sensory level and maximizing. How do I bring more of that? More, like grateful for the beauty in my life. And so this was the first phase of the awakening. And for 2 months, I was just alive with the water baptism. And I was walking around, I could feel that there was so much energy coming from my heart center that it was starting to like pop other people's heart centers open, like resonance, right? So some people were kind of like, okay, like doing double takes in a way that was, I could feel like, and a housemate that I had at the time went through an awakening too, as a result of me going through it. So it was like, so the energy, of
Contagious.
course, the energy, of course, is beyond the body. And then I can start to sense my etheric emotional body now. In any case, that was sort of this kind of high that I had for 2 months of just radiating this energy. And then some deep aspects of the unconscious started to rise through me. And no longer could I use a prayer a meditation, an affirmation to take myself out of that state. So what we're seeing here is the loss of control of the personality, where the spiritual practice no longer can elevate you out. I can't just ascend out of my challenge. And these were kinds of emotional states that I'd never experienced before. It was just uncontrollable rage, uncontrollable grief, sleeplessness, all sorts of really intense physical, emotional pain. And then it was like a month getting prepared to initiate into the fire. And when I realized that that was kind of happening, I kind of recognized at a mental level, but of course at a being level, there was nothing but primordial terror. And that's what Christians mean when they say the fear of God. It's like, you know, people can make a dogmatic thing about it where it becomes obedient to a dogmatic idea, right? Which is not the same as the true thing. But why fear of God? Well, because when you truly surrender to that fire, it will require complete surrender and letting go of all that you think yourself to be. And that's, of course, terrifying. And so right at that precipice, that threshold that I was drawn to, and this is what a lot of people have when they get to this point, they think they're about to go insane. It feels like you're about to lose your mind. Oh my God, I'm going to lose, because you are, in a sense. You're going to the edge of your psychological reference point, and it feels like I'm about to die. And of course, it's psychological, but it feels physical. It's like I'm about to physically die. And it was, yeah. So when this started to happen, I went off for 2 weeks in the bush by myself, and I practically just had an exorcism, what would have looked like an exorcism to anyone looking in, because it was, when you get to that point, you meet the deepest aspects of the controlling ego. This is the true meeting of the shadow. And it came up as, yeah, it was like this dark, hateful, like really seeing what truly my ego is doing at that core. And it was just everything like doubt. You know, you meet all the heads, and that's the story of the Buddha, right? Right before he gets enlightened, he's sitting under the Bodhi tree, and the 7 heads of the, whatever they call the demon, appear. And it's like greed, lust, fear. And actually, you think fear would be the hardest one, but the last one he meets, if I'm recalling the story correctly, is actually self-doubt.
Right? A doubt.
Self-doubt.
Interesting.
Yeah, like you'd think fear, but then the doubt, it's that voice of, you know, you're nothing, or you think something special is happening to you, but, you know, or like whatever it is. And so this was a very intense, it was a crossover point. And then there was a complete death of, and it's not like then your ego's gone, because it's a continual process, but it's like a significant threshold where the control that the ego has over the body mind breaks, and the energy of the deep Christ, of the fire Christ, comes in and starts to directly rewire the physical vehicle. And so, yeah, and then since then, it was like, it's been basically 2 years of integrating that central awakening. It was like a couple months of burning flames, painful and ecstasy at the same time, like just nothing that words can describe. I mean, just a complete grace. And yeah, since then it's just been allowing the body mind to be rewired by spirit, basically, to become a legitimate functioning agent of the truth that wishes to birth itself here at this time, to bring the kingdom here.
That is so eloquently put. That was beautiful. That was so informative and yet so creative and poetic. I really got so much out of that, because I often think about the journey, whether it's the hero's journey or like this idea of going through all these struggles in life, and how at times, I mean, I'm going through my own dark night of the soul, and I think a lot of people are. At times, it's hard to really appreciate the process, but hearing you go through it, realizing that it is actually leading you somewhere, and seeing this birth of this new you come about through this fire, this baptism, it's a beautiful thing to hear about, you know. And I think of the experiences that I not only observed, but I've gone through myself, and whereas they haven't been that deep, but it does lead to a new place, a reawakening, you know. So wow. So this is essentially what you help people to go through with the work that you do. Is that right? To deal with this shadow and to have a metamorphosis? Is this the kind of work that you're involved in?
More or less. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of different aspects of our healing of our realization. I mean, what I just described there was awakening at the heart. It's the awakening of the true spiritual center. But then there's the mind that needs to be worked with to empty out perceptual structures, because the shadow of, if you're just heart realized, then you can still be perceiving stuff through a noisy or a scattered 5-year-old consciousness. So the brain has to be emptied out. And then there's the belly. If you don't integrate your love into the belly, then your love might be a supreme beam of a flaming sword of light that, you know, will inspire others. But you don't yet have the wisdom of the integrity, because the integrity comes from the mother principle. She's the how, if he's the why. So awakening to the heart is why, but how requires coming down. And so just as it's much a fear of God in the heart to surrender there, it's an even deeper fear of the mother, because she's like a black hole that just completely sucks you in. And you know, the belly is where we hold all the deepest trauma, the groin, in the genitals. I mean, all the ways in which we're compressed around the sexual energy and the life energy. There's all this sort of unconscious pain held there, which, you know, and when you go into the belly, it's just a hell ride, and you can't personal development your way out of that. You just have to go through the ride of this grief or this loneliness, and all of these aspects of your humanity are being called to be touched, all of these aspects of the unconscious.
Sure.
So with people that work with us, it just depends, because I can't always give it a sacred heart transmission, because it's not always relevant. Sometimes they need a head transmission, or they need support working with deconstructing the mind and belief systems.
Sure.
Other times it's just a deep, warm embrace of the mother of compassion as someone is riding through deep belly ancestral trauma. Because if you just try and say, oh, blast Christ out of your trauma, it's like that doesn't work all the time. You know?
It sounds like you're identifying what part of the journey they're in, and therefore discerning how to address their issues. You know, I mean, hearing about your journey and hearing about what you're talking about now, I think of the Kundalini Awakening, and in the classic Vedic idea, essentially you're going through life raising this Kundalini to the highest centers, and as you're going through different areas, for instance, you start at the root that deals with survival, that's the sexual energy. As you rise the energy, you experience different things. For instance, as you move towards the heart, that's where you have this sense of love and the universality of consciousness, that kind of thing. And then you bring yourself up to the high energies and you experience different things until finally there is an awakening. And the idea is, as you can't go from, well, the idea is you don't go from the root straight away to the crown. You know, there's this journey, and as you're opening up these centers and going through different experiences, there's this matriculation of consciousness where you're slowly becoming the person that you need to become in order to move to the Christ consciousness connection towards that higher aspect of you. And it sounds like, just hearing your journey, it sounds like you were going through certain stages, you know, just hearing you go from one stage to another. It sounds like there is this awakening that's taking place, like Kundalini awakening. At least that's what came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, the more I go into it, I mean, at this time, with the kind of way that it's unfurling through us and some of the other people we've worked with, it seems to be becoming more and more rounded. And what I mean by that is, it started with, like, I would say the journey really started to like aligning with God fully, and like giving up anything in my life that wasn't in alignment with that complete surrender and obedience to what is true, which is what's scary for people, of course. But that was the heart. And then through opening the heart, the energies started to come into the mind. And then, okay, now I'm sort of purifying my headspace, and okay, like all the contraction and tension and thoughts, we tend to think our mind is something ethereal and separate. But what happens is, when we start to enter the head, we start to be able to feel thoughts somatically. You can feel sensorially thoughts like, oh, I wonder what Sally's doing. Oh, whoa, I can feel it in my brain. So the head starts to go through an opening and a healing. And when that started to happen, I started to have really intense headaches, and not the kind of like painkiller headaches, compression headaches of like the head healing itself. And in fact, I've had a constant level of really to a medium to acute level painful headaches for nearly 2 years, constant. Because of the brain healing itself. So we don't tend to think of thoughts as physical things, but to have a stressed out belief or stressed out perception, it requires that like to the head to kink up. So to open the head, to relax the head into quiet, into spaciousness, which is a Shiva energy. And the more we have space up here, the more we can listen to the heart, and the more we can allow Shakti to express. Because if we don't have a pure head, and then we have a bunch of life force open in our system, we're like, you're just like a crazy person. Your mind,
Absolutely.
it's like a computer full of junk.
That's a powerful point. I mean, I was brought up learning a lot about this, and I mean, what I get from what you're saying a lot of the times is when you are trying to, let's say, access this higher frequency, this energy, you need to prepare your body for it. This is why you go through this Kundalini. Your body is not just going through like spiritual changes, but you're going through physiological changes, because the idea is that if you're not ready to take in this energy, it can burn you. Like light has the power not only to deliver truth, but to burn. That's why in a lot of these shamanistic societies, they go through preparation rituals in order to prepare you for the awakening of these divine revelations, and whether it's through an ayahuasca journey or through meditational practices. I mean, there are things that they do, like purifying the body, eating the right kind of food, and disciplining the mind in order to become more receptive towards these higher energies. Because the thing that I feel like isn't really discussed a lot about accessing this kind of stuff is, if you're not ready for it, it actually can do a lot of harm. Like you hear about people going through schizophrenia when they're like, this is why a lot of the Christians, typically, they're very apprehensive about dealing with what they consider to be this kind of stuff. Like they call it the occult, when essentially the cult is that which is hidden, not realizing that much of these Christian traditions are seated in the esoteric sciences, like the oldest versions of Christianity, Gnosticism, they actually deal with these concepts. But the fear comes from the fact that there is understandably dangerous when you're not prepared, when you're not ready. I mean, one of the reasons I'd always avoided certain intoxicants as a child to this day is because it can be dangerous if you're opening yourself up to, these things can actually be doorways to different states of consciousness. And if you're not in the right kind of space, you can damage yourself. And I think similarly, when you are accessing certain frequencies, you're experiencing certain things, it can be dangerous if you haven't gone through the necessary steps to get there.
Yeah, this is a really poignant aspect that you bring up, and particularly with the Christians, because I know exactly what you mean, that they're so resistant to
Call
anything.
you a witch. Stay away from that woman. She is a witch, I tell you.
Exactly. And it's like this, and that comes from it's like a misunderstanding of what the snake in the Garden of Eden really means. Like, it's.
Well, let's get into that. What is the? I feel like you would be a representation of the snake. The knowledge. It's like, open your mind to the truth, to the feminine energy.
Yeah. Well. Archetypally, like if we take away the superficial meaning, actually it becomes very obvious what the snake represents. And what we need to see with Adam and Eve in the garden is, of course, they're in a unified state. They're one with God. That's why it's a heaven. It's the Garden of Eden, right? And of course, then the snake comes. And the snake, what does the snake represent? It represents deception, obviously. But why is it that the snake is the symbol of deception? And this is why. Typically, when people start to descend into the feminine, and I would say that physically and with consciousness, it translates to descending into the belly, because that's the earth. You're descending into because I am earth. I'm part of her body. So bringing consciousness down. It's not uncommon for people to start to have archetypal dreams that bring up these imprints. So some people can go, oh, I'm not Christian or religious. And then they go into the feminine and they have all this like Christian mythology start to appear. It's like, okay, yeah, because the archetypes are there. So when people have dreams meeting the feminine, it's not uncommon for that to show up as reptiles, snakes, sometimes even supernatural forces, as it was for me, but typically snakes and spiders. And it's like, why is this? Well, if we think about nature and the evolution of nature, of the physical matter aspect of reality, the snakes and the reptiles are one of the oldest forms of life that go way and way and way and way back. So they represent matter. They represent the evolution of nature. So, okay, the snake's demonic then? No. The thing is, if the symbol is that when Adam and Eve listen to the snake, they are deceiving themselves by identifying with nature, identifying with matter. And that's not how it's supposed to be. You're meant to identify with spirit, and matter reflects the beauty of that. So what that will look like is, at a simple level, for layman's terms, I feel a lustuous impulse to go out and like fuck like crazy. And because I feel that in the body, I act on it. But I don't sense, is that actually in integrity to do that? Or if it's a food thing, I have a craving to, eat lots of bad food. Okay, you're attaching yourself to matter. You're deceiving yourself by thinking that your immediate animalistic impulses are truth. And of course, when you see a child, I mean, this is obviously what that stage of development is. Because if you say, okay, I'm going to let my 5-year-old child like run its own life, then what does the kid do? It stays up all night. It reacts immediately to its emotional, physical nature. And of course, there's nothing wrong with the emotional, physical nature, but part of our growth is to integrate and have a mastery over the animal body. And that doesn't mean repression, and it doesn't mean excessiveness. It means to be integrating the body's impulses with love, which is spirit. And so what happened in the Garden of Eden was that they put matter first. They put matter before God. And it's meant to be, I center in spirit as the truth, and then I integrate into matter, and she reflects that. But if I put the cart before the horse, this is where all sorts of shit starts to go wrong. And I start to I descend into my animal nature. And the animal nature is beautiful and must be integrated. But if you're just that, then you become an animal. You see
Absolutely.
that. And
that
if
is
you're
such
just
a
spirit,
salient point. Yeah.
yeah.
Because I've heard
Sorry,
Osho express the same idea in the sense of essentially trying to sublimate the lower energy towards the higher realms. I mean, Osho is one of these people that got me kind of changing my view towards how I would see a lot of the taboo top, like a lot of the Christian ideal is that, oh, you must avoid having any kind of debaucherous, like fulfilling this sexual desire kind of thing, repressive kind of energy. And Osho kind of looks at this as its representation of this creative force, like the sexual energy. And ultimately, like what you were saying, it's about using that and turning that towards something more useful, towards the higher centers. So there's this life force, and this is represented within Eros. This is like a platonic concept. The idea of, Plato talks about the different kinds of love. Eros, agape, philia, but Eros deals more with that sexual kind of energy, and this is kind of like centered in the root kind of thing. And the spiritual approach is to try to use that energy and cultivate things dealing with the spiritual world, towards the higher planes. So towards your art, towards uplifting the vibration of the planet, towards purpose, rather than just, as you're saying, being caught up in this animalistic world. And I think that is really a beautiful ideal.
And we have to see that it needs to be integrated, because the Christian fallacy is like, oh, then I don't go there. And that's crap, because that's moving from, like, you're not bringing spirit and love down into her. And that is her deepest longing. And of course, that's why when women start to descend, women tend to more quickly, I mean, it's in men too, but women can more quickly access the vortex of the feminine longing. It's like deeper, like longing for God, longing for consciousness. And that's why it plays out as like a longing for, if you're unawakened, it's a longing for me to be fulfilled by a codependent relationship. It's like, actually, your longing is for God, but you need to get in contact with that part of yourself. There needs to be a meeting with the primordial animal, that primordial snake. And why is it Medusa? Why does Medusa freeze? And that's in Harry Potter too, the basilisk, right? The snake that paralyzes. And that's because there's the fear of nature, the fear of the feminine. But part of that healing and coming into the true divine union, and of course the Christians will say sex is preserved for people in marriage. It's like, again, you've literalized something. It's the sacred marriage. It's the sacred marriage, the union of consciousness and matter. This is the purified sexuality. It's love, it's light and dark. It births the black light, and it births the divine child. And that is true. That's an erotic, a deeply erotic, passionate, both deep and dense and light and spiritual at once. And this is what we're called to meet. And what you were saying before about the need to purify the system, it's like, well, yeah, it's exactly right. And this is why, when you talk about people becoming schizophrenic, it's like, this is the trouble if people open the feminine, specifically the feminine, before they've worked with the masculine. And that's
because such a salient point. My favorite author, I just had to drop in this just quickly. I think it was Dao Sudo, always says, know the masculine, but go with the feminine. And it's the idea of like learning the masculine, learning the left brain, learning how things work, understanding things, and then letting that go and allowing the intuitive mind to take hold, the feminine, the creative force. So I really like the fact that you said that. But sorry, go on.
No, of course. And that's exactly right. Because if you're just the animal nature, it's like I say, it's not that matter's evil. It's just that if you're only matter, then you just are reacting to just impulse, impulse, impulse. And so the learning of the masculine is purifying and maturing your consciousness. And really what you're doing is you're increasing your potency, your penetrative, loving potency as consciousness. Regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, your consciousness is him, and he is the holding space, empty mind, and he is penetrative love as heart. And so those two combined create, it's like creates a symbolic phallus, like
The
an
alchemical
ultimate
wedding,
and it
the
creates,
synthesis.
it's like it's like, and so for a woman, if she just goes into her Shakti without him, then she's fucking all over the place, and that's not this is not feminine power. And there's a lot of miscommunication with a lot of feminine teachings where they're calling it a feminine teaching before they've integrated him. And it's like, if you don't have him, you don't know how to hold her, you don't know how to meet her, you don't know how to interpret her. It's like she is this wild force and your consciousness is that of a 2-year-old. It's like, no, the masculine needs to be able to love and stay still in her vortex to merge with her. Otherwise it's just, you're just taken out by her.
I feel like we should talk about this. I feel like in modern day society, there's this war at play between the masculine and the feminine. Like I was having this conversation not that long ago, where even me bringing up the term feminine energy set this lady off. She was, I don't believe in masculine and feminine. There is no sex. They're all the same. And I had to clarify that when I'm speaking about them, like a lot of people have this idea that you associate the feminine energy, the sacred feminine, purely with like female and masculine. But the thing is, in the Eastern school of thought, these energies are found within both the sexes. I mean, granted, the female typically has certain characteristics that we associate more with femininity, but the idea, like with the yin and yang, you have an element of both within you. And the idea is to nurture this, but also to have balance. Like I think the problem sometimes is when you get too caught up with one side. Like, for instance, I hate the idea of men that have not cultivated this masculine energy, the sacred masculine, standing in your sovereignty, believing in yourself, drive, wanting to cultivate your ambition, this kind of energy, as opposed to just compassion and creativity, nurturing, which is what I typically, anyway, define with the sacred feminine. And I feel as if we've kind of lost this idea of how they both serve a role in society. And I think there's something beautiful when you see two people come together, and it's not necessarily a case of male being masculine, female being feminine, but often I find there's this alchemical wedding, this alchemy of opposites that's at play. And that's when you see, I remember hearing, I think it was Osho, say that this is a very powerful thing when you see these two polarities come into play. Now, I don't believe it's necessary in order to have a healthy relationship. I know some people, I've met some people that are like a representation of both different energies, and there's something magical that comes into effect when you see someone that is still within your kind of energetic makeup, within this feminine or masculine energy, but it's almost like stranger particles. They're not typically found together, but when they do come together, it's powerful. But I just feel like there is this loss of understanding between appreciating the feminine and the masculine.
Yeah, well, the more dissociated we become from our truest nature, which is God and Goddess, the more this confusion and dissociation around gender happens. Now, of course, there's reasonably a phase of culture where we break out of gender roles. Okay, woman, housewife, man, job. Of course, like that's because that's just nothing compared to what the actual essence is. Concept is not the essence. So of course it makes, okay, we're going to break out of conceptual roles. That's fine. But the problem is when there's a sidestepping into like, oh, well, none of it's real. Like gender isn't real. Well, no, because we see masculine and feminine principle at literally every layer of reality.
Exactly.
There is a male and a female principle at every layer of analysis. And to be against that, to to say that that isn't the case is actually, ironically, the deepest rejection of the feminine possible, because you are rejecting nature in this. You are rejecting the wisdom of the infinite within the form reality. So it doesn't mean that woman is just woman, because if you're being identified, I'm a woman, so I have all these ideas about what that means. I mean, that's false. That's identification. We need to dissolve identification, dissolve what you think you are. But at a deeper level, when we open consciousness, consciousness is masculine. Because why? Because matter, the body, receives penetrative consciousness. So you as a man, this is what's interesting. This really clears it up for people. If I'm working with you, if we work together and I'm going to help you meet your primordial maleness, what I'm actually doing is helping you descend into your feminine. And that's because your male body came from the earth. It is matter, and thus it is feminine. But through opening your feminine, your deepest feminine, the primordial male opens up, because even though your body is feminine, it's a male expression of that universal principle. And it's the same thing with a woman. Her essence might be most deeply receptive at the fundamental level, but she must learn how to penetrate herself. Because if she doesn't learn how to do that, then what that means is that the man, and this is a lot of confusion in tantric and sacred sexuality works, where they literalize the essences a bit. So, okay, man's always consciousness, and then woman's always receptive. And the problem with that is that if man's always being consciousness, he doesn't get to penetrate himself, and she doesn't learn how to mature to penetrate herself. Because the reality is that you are also a woman in terms of your body. So if we're in a relationship together and you start to meet some trauma, which is you opening your feminine, your body, then part of my role in my relationship with you is bringing loving consciousness there to support you in that. So there needs to be a capacity for us to be flexible in where is the penetration and the receptivity happening in any one moment. However, of course, when we do that very, very deeply, then yes, there is a male essence that opens through his body, through his integration. And there is the female essence that opens through her body, through her integration. And it's not that we then become just feminine and masculine, because like I said, it's both. You're always maturing your consciousness. But the ironic thing is that the less you are identified with gender, the more your body's essence opens. The more your body's essence opens. So it's like, if I really don't believe I am a woman as a human being, that allows my womanhood to open, because I'm not contracting myself into an idea of what it means to be a woman. I'm allowing
that's a powerful point. That's actually very interesting. I often wonder what would happen to women if we left them in a society that was completely devoid of all the constructs of what it is to be, like there were no men or women around. They just brought up in, let's say, one little family where I guess everyone within that family is of mixed sexuality, whether it would lead them to become their own organic selves, which would be identified with masculine and feminine, or whether they morph into something else, because a lot of the argument you often hear is that so much of our ideas of sex, as far as gender, are shaped by the environment, and I think what you were saying really identifies the fact that ultimately we do have the capacity, and we're really we're standing in our true selves when we allow ourselves to flourish without being attached to what is masculine and what is feminine, that we see within society, if that makes sense.
Of course. And the problem with what people are doing with this breaking out of gender roles thing, it's like, okay, I'm breaking out of the role that a woman is a housewife, which is a conceptual construct. And then instead, what I'm going to do is make a whole other series of mental constructs to define myself by. Yeah. Oh, now I'm a gray gender, I'm a neutral gender. It's like you're doing the exact same thing. You're confining the body to a mental construct, and that is a rejection of the feminine and an immature masculine. Same thing. So you're just doing the same thing. You're just calling it a different, pot calling the kettle black. And that when you look at nature, if you look at the eucalyptus tree, you look at the aloe vera plant, you look at the rose, you look at the lily doesn't know it's a lily. All right. Its liliness is transcending the concept, of course, but it is its own nature. It blooms fully. And so what we've done to ourselves as humans, we're like a plant that we put concrete all over, and that's our mental constructs. But we are a nature. The feminine essence, when women do womb work, the womb becomes obvious, that it's so obvious that the womb is a direct portal to the feminine essence. That's not my opinion. That's not a mental construct of woman. That's nature. Just as in the same way that men's initiating spirit, or the masculine initiating spirit, is reflected in the biology, where the sperm, of course, sparks the process of the egg. And so the essence of the body, of course, we are not the body. We are consciousness. Consciousness is androgynous, really. Being itself is the yin yang. It's everything. But when we express in form, we are playing out those principles. And so if a woman really matures her masculine, if she goes through an initiation with that, then at some point she will be called to take him in her into her as the earth body. And when she does that, women will open into a deep receptivity and a depth of power that is very specifically accessible through her womb. And of course, men can access that too, because they have their own version. But women are always going to be that much more deeper, just in the same way that as he emerges in his presence, as he matures into his manhood, there is a penetrative and spacious capacity that really comes alive in the nature. And we've seen that. But in this world where we've become so lodged in our conceptual realm, we think this, we just make this fallacy all the time, rather than coming into the really deep appreciation and the love of what we are at the most deepest, natural, matured level, and the beauty of how we are designed to collaborate and fit together. I mean, the war between the sexes is just absolute nonsense. And to the degree that a woman is hating or angry at her man, it's because she just hasn't dealt with her wounding. She has not dealt with the father trauma, and she's just projecting it onto men. And she's just being sexist. She's perpetuating patriarchy in believing that she's fighting it. It's like, to do that, to be like that, like, oh, fuck men, that's patriarchal by its nature.
Yeah.
It's consciousness, like rejecting life, rejecting love, and that is patriarchy.
That's such a salient point. I often see the same kind of hypocrisy in the way that we look at identity politics. It's like we care so much about not being racist that we're willing to have this racism of low expectations, feeling as if, oh, we need to treat certain minority classes with special attention, like Black people. And I had a girl say to me one time that she said that it is impossible for me, anytime I go for a job interview, to be on the same level of likelihood to get that job because I'm Black. And it's just a fact. Like, I'm just at a low, like, I won't be. And she was trying to say that as a compliment. I'm telling, well, I don't look at myself like that. I mean, I think I have a lot of Black privilege. I have a lovely smile. I don't I don't burn in the sun, and like, I'm athletic. And if I go for a job interview, more often than not, have you met me? I'm super charming. I'm not going to be at a disadvantage. It's like, no, it's just. And the thing is, I see this in the same way that there's this hypocrisy in sexism. It's like, oh, there's this unfairness towards women, therefore I'm going to start looking at men as the enemy. I feel like there's this hypocrisy in the way that we look at identity politics a lot of the times, and how we structure society where we're assuming that someone is of less worth in a way, even though we're saying that we care more about them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. But whoa,
yeah.
Risa, we have gone through so much information, and it feels like it's been the blink of an eye. I really appreciate this. I would love to hear your perspective, your esoteric psychological breakdown of what is going on in the world right now in terms of these lockdowns, in terms of these mandatory restrictions, the vaccines. I mean, how do you see what is going on being a reflection of things that we're dealing with individually and collectively? I mean, what's your breakdown of what's going on right now?
Yeah. Well, it really depends on your level of analysis, but I would say the key is to be very flexible and fluid in our capacity to act responsibly, to take sovereign care of our own lives. And that means, with this vaccine stuff, it's just ridiculous. And, it's important that we be willing to stand for the no, obviously, and to accept the consequences of being truthful at times where truth is becoming more and more threatening and more cracked down on. So there's always that aspect of responsibility in trusting your deepest nature and trusting what needs to be, how you need to conduct yourself in these times. However, it's also a matter on the other side of picking your battles with discernment and with maturity. And yes, okay, lockdowns, it's awful, but the the upside of that is the way in which we're kind of being sent to our rooms. If we look at it from a metaphysical level, rather than thinking about it as government, it's like, okay, what is this opportunity for me at a being level right now? Can I rest into my core, into my center? Can I dissolve beyond the chaos that is appearing in my outer world? And to continue merging with and coming to know yourself as the infinite, because that is the only way out. I mean, you know, even if you end up going to jail for you know, saying no to something, if it gets that bad, we have to be willing to stand in the flame in a circumstance like that, and to know yourself as that eternal flame, as that truth, and to rest in that, it's the deepest knowing that you can have of how to hold yourselves in these times. And of course, all those acts of responsibility, taking the best care for yourself, compassion with yourself, giving yourself time for the nervous system to wind down and rest and relax, so that you're not, because it's just as much another kind of identity to get into the fight with the outer world. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can stay centered in what is true without having to contract and become another identity. It's like, see that there is no fight, see that the battle is internal. And when you come to that point of union within yourself, then you can come out into the world in what appears to be a battle with that wisdom, and that is what will transform.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was beautiful. I'm not sure if you knew that you did this, but I felt as if you illustrated both the different archetypes, like the masculine and the feminine, you know, on one hand, standing in your sovereignty, but also on the other hand, looking at this as an opportunity for growth and reflection. And it's like the perfect answer, because I think often people get too caught up in one mindset. And I think in order to have a clearer perspective, we need to bring together both concepts, you know, the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, in regards to what's going on in our world. So I thought that was very beautiful. But Risa, I like to call you Risa Boom Shakalaka, because you bring on so many, you bring on a lot of interesting dimensions into the conversation. You know, we didn't even get to touch on the art that I know that is still a big part of your life, and the acting and whatnot. But thank you for coming on the Crystal Journey and dropping these wisdomatic truth bombs, these musings, these revelations, these soft, sacred, feminine ideals, and this understanding of sovereignty. It really is a pleasure. You are a scholar. You are a sacred lady of the hearts, and a true priestess. So thank you once again. And look, I would love to have you come on anytime. This is the first like legit Zoom session I've done. So yeah, it's I'm glad that it was with you. And once again, wish you all the best, and we will have to bring you on again another time, Risa.
Absolutely. It was a wonderful pleasure to speak with you. Very fun. And yeah, thank you to everyone for tuning in. And if you want to find out more about me, I have a website, which is core-integrity.com. If you want to check that out as well.
I will put that down on the details on the link here. Do you want any other social media? I know you just recently got off. Well, I presume. Well, I know you're on Telegram. That's how we kind of linked up. You want anything else?
Yeah, we're on YouTube. So if you look up Core Integrity, we should come up, or Core Integrity Risa. We're on YouTube and Facebook and a few other things as well. So yeah, feel free to tune in and connect there. Awesome.
Well, I'll put that down. Thanks again, Risa. It's been an absolute pleasure. Until next time, peace out. Keep it real. This is your chocolate Nubian Crystal. Ow!
What is liberty?
What the? Who says you can't build muscle on a vegan diet?
What's it like being a hottie in the vegan community?
There are no political solutions, only technological ones.
The economics of the system don't allow multiple competing systems to survive.
Engineering, technology, these arts of humanity, they are magic.